Welcome to Chapter 17 of Intermediate Accounting. This chapter, we're going to talk about post-retirement obligations. And let me let you in on a little secret. This is typically the hardest chapter for most accounting students. But that's okay, because I'm here to walk you through all of this so that we can understand it together. So let's jump right in. All right, first of all, let's understand what a pension benefit is. So, pension benefits are crucial for the financial security in retirement for the employee, and they are going to provide income for that employee after they retire based on their employment history, and that allows them to have some of that financial security even when they are past their working years. So, this is where an employer says, hey, look, you come to our company and we are going to help you out, not just now while you're employed here, not just with health insurance, not just with a salary, but we are also going to give you some type of future benefit for even after you are done in your working years. So this is just what a company may choose to provide for their employees. Now, there are two main types of benefit plans. Both of these technically are pensions. And if I've already lost your attention, come on back because you've got to know the difference between these two plans or you're really going to struggle in this chapter. So the first one is a defined benefit plan. So the defined benefit plan provides a guaranteed payout during retirement based on the salary and the years of service. So the company is defining how much they are going to be paying to the employee, and they're going to do that for the rest of their lives after they retire. Then we have the defined contribution plan. This is where retirement funds are based on the contributions from the employee and the employer. And there's no guarantee at how much there'll be as a payout whenever retirement comes around. So let's dig into these even further. So the defined benefit plan, they are defining the benefit that the employee is going to get. They are promising the employees a set retirement payout based on that salary and the years of service. The employer is the one that bears the investment risk. That's important to understand. They are defining how much the benefit's going to be after retirement, which makes the employer bear all of the investment risk. They are the one responsible for ensuring that there are funds available to pay out to their retired former employees. So, a lot of companies are shifting away from this defined benefit plan, and that is because of several reasons. Here's some of the main ones. They are high and unpredictable cost involved in this. So we are going to work through all of the costs. That's what makes this chapter so challenging. And you're going to see why a company would want to shift away from this. And we see this with most companies. They are moving away from the defined benefit plan and they're going to the contribution plans. And that's just so much unpredictability. And that investment risk on the company is really a lot to bear for them. There's also a lot of regulatory pressures that they have to take into consideration, and they have to make sure that they are meeting all of those. Now, businesses are more focused on attracting new talent, not trying to buy that long term loyalty. My grandpa worked for the same company for 40 years. And whenever I started out in my career and I had moved around, this was even before a career, and I had been in, being a waitress and working as a bank teller and working at a furniture store, my grandpa said, what are you doing? You should have already chosen your job that you're going to stick to for the rest of your life. And while jumping around from job to job is definitely not a good thing to do, we just don't see people lasting for 40 years or for just several decades at a job. So companies aren't trying to attract that anymore. They are trying to attract new talent that they expect to stay around for several years, but not for several decades necessarily. It's great if you do find a company you want to stay at for several decades, but that is not the norm anymore, like it was back when my grandpa started working. So instead, companies are shifting to a defined contribution plan. So this is going to be where the retirement is based on the employees and or the employer putting money into individual accounts for each employee. So we typically see this as a 401k. And that's the most common way. There are other ways that we see it, but they're very similar plans with different names. but the employee is the one bearing the risk. They're putting their own money in, and hopefully the employer is matching that to some extent. But then the employee can choose to either just put it all into a cash account where it doesn't grow at all besides contributions, or they can put it into investment accounts, into mutual funds, and hopefully watch it grow. But, there's no guarantee with that because that's putting it into stocks and bonds. So they may, they could see their 401k shrink if there's a major downturn in the market. And we've seen that with people before. So all of the risk is on the employee. As soon as the employer puts their portion of the money in, they're like, that's it, we're done. We did all we have to do. So it's just more of an individual expense for them and they can walk away. Whereas with the defined benefit plan, they are locked in for possibly decades and decades of making sure they're setting money aside and ready to pay out their retired employees until the time of death. So, major commitment there. So let's first look at the defined contribution plan, the accounting for that. It is way simpler than the defined benefit plan. So we're going to start out with this one and we're going to get it out of the way, and then we're going to move to the defined benefit plan. So if this is just an example, if a plan promises an annual contribution that's equal to 4% of the employee's salary, if the employee makes $100,000 in a year, the employer would recognize pension expense for the $4,000. So they said, as the employer, we will put 4% of your paycheck into, we will match 4%. So we will add 4% based on what your pay amount is into your 401k. So if they made $100,000 a year times 4%, they've got $4,000 that the employer is going to put into this 401k, into this defined contribution plan for the employee. Now, the employee would also be putting money in, but we are just focused on the accounting for the company. So this is the journal entry. They are going to debit pension expense for the $4,000, 4% of $100,000, and they credit cash, and they move that cash to their investment fund wherever they are holding the 401k. And that's it. They don't have to do anything else. If the employee invests this money and they lose it all in the stock market, then that's their own problem. The company's done everything that they have to do. So you've already learned how to do all of the accounting for a defined contribution plan. Of course, when we get into the defined benefit plan, it is much more challenging. So here, let's go ahead and see a little glimpse into it, and then we're going to start digging into an example. An employee retires after 30 years of service with a final salary of $200,000. The annual benefits are calculated as 1.5% times 30 years times the final year's salary. So we are going to take this pension formula. So in this case, it's 1.5% times the years of service times the final year's salary. The 1.5% can be different per company. That's them saying what percentage they're going to pay times the years of service that they were there times the salary. So it could be more or less based on each company. So for this particular individual, their final salary is expected to be $200,000. They're going to work there for 30 years, and this company uses 1.5%. That's what they're putting towards the retirement. So that means that would give us $90,000. This $90,000 tells us when the employee retires, the company will still pay $90,000 a year to the employee until the time of death. So they were making $200,000 a year, but based on the percentage that the company chose and the 30 years of service, the company is going to continue to pay them $90,000 a year. That's a big commitment right there. The employee's done. They don't work for them anymore, but they guaranteed this, so it is a defined benefit that they offered. Now we're going to look at, with a defined benefit plan, what are the uncertainties that go along with that? So one is the rate of return on the plan assets. So when I say plan assets, this is really important. We want to understand what this is. So a plan asset is the money that the company is setting aside to be able to pay their employees when they retire. So they put the money into an investment account and earn a return on that. So we don't know exactly what the return will be, so it's hard for us to really predict what it will grow into in several decades. The number of employees that will be eligible for these benefits is also something that's going to be an uncertainty for us, because it's not like an employee can work there for 6 months and then we're going to pay them retirement for the rest of their lives. A company is going to have very strict criteria that the employee has to meet in order to have their financial benefits throughout retirement. So we don't know how many employees will meet that. We don't know exactly what age the employees will choose to retire. So if they choose to retire when they're younger, okay, we'll have to pay them for longer, but they won't have worked here for as long, so their retirement benefits won't be as large each year. Does that make sense? So we've got an employee that worked there for 20 years and they are not going to get as much each year as an employee that worked there for 30 years. So it's based on your years of service and your salary. So we don't know exactly what point our employees will retire and then how long they're going to live after that. So the retiree's life expectancy is a huge thing. Are they going to live for another 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? How long do we have to pay them that salary after they retire? And then we have the future compensation levels. We're going to pay them their retirement benefit based on their final salary. So we don't know exactly what that's going to be either. So all of these are major uncertainties that we have to consider. So, who do you think the professional is that is paid to assess these uncertainties and give us the best prediction they can? This is a specific type of statistician that is going to help make this decision as they assess everything about every individual employee. You know, how long do we think they will live? How long do we think they're going to work there? How much does it look like they're going to get paid? They're getting paid to assess all of this. Do you know what that professional is called? It's an actuary. This is a pretty high paying job. A lot of people go into because of the high pay. So, something to think about if you love statistics. But they are paid based on all of these criteria and they're trying to do the best job they can at predicting, how long will they live? What will your plan assets return? How many years are they going to work there, and so on. So, some other things that go into our pension benefit, our defined benefit plan, is going to be the pension's gains and losses. So, a loss for the pension versus the gain, it could be when a pension obligation, that liability that we have, is higher or lower than expected. If it's higher, it'll be a loss because that's more of an obligation. If it's lower, we could have a gain. So in other words, maybe if an employee leaves much earlier than we expected, so maybe before they even meet the criteria to earn their pension, then we have less of an obligation. We don't have to pay that employee out during retirement. So that would be a gain for us. Or if we find out the employee is actually going to make much more at the end of their years of service, that's going to be a loss for that obligation because we're actually going to have to pay them out more based on that salary. And then we also get to the return on plan assets. So if those returns are higher or lower, of course, we will see a gain or a loss as well. So some key elements that go along with this: the employer's obligation to pay the future benefits, the plan assets that we set aside to pay those future benefits, and the periodic expense just related to having a pension plan. So we're going to dig into all of this further. So, pension expense components. What goes into calculating a pension expense? Because we're going to have to record this every year. So, we have service cost. So, when I say service, that has to do with the number of years the employee has worked there. How many years have they serviced the company? So, those costs are going to be something that go into the expense. Our expense increases every time an employee's there for another year because now we're going to have to pay them even more. They've been there for longer. It also has to do with any interest paid on any interest accrued on the liability, which has a lot to do with the time value of money. Then we subtract out any return that we got on those plan assets. So we invested those plan assets, we invested that money, and any return we get, we are going to show as a decrease in our expense. So that's awesome. Then we're going to look at the amortized portion of the prior service costs. So this is if the employee if we make a change to the pension plan, then we'll have to show some prior service costs. We may have to amortize that if it gets to a large enough amount. We'll walk through all of that. And there can also be gains and losses from revising the pension liability. Again, if the pension liability goes up or down, or if the plan assets return is higher or lower than expected. So there is a lot that goes into the pension expense. And right now it's just a bunch of words, but we're going to jump into all of the details, some in this video and some in future videos. Okay, there's a lot of words on a slide. I don't like putting a lot of words on a slide, but let's just walk through each of these one step at a time. These are 3 different ways that we can measure the pension obligation. So the first one is the ABO, the accumulated benefit obligation. So this is where the present value of the benefits earned to date. So how much have they earned as of right now based on their current salaries? That's how we decide what the pension obligation should be, what that liability should be. It's based on how many years they've worked right now and how much they're making now. So it includes the vested and non-vested benefits. Now, anytime I say the word vested, anytime you hear the word vested, when it has to do with retirement, this is how much the employee has the right to keep. So vested means they have those rights. If it's non-vested, they don't have the rights to the employer's side of that. So the downside of this is it does not project the future salary increases. So they're just considering how much they make now, but they may work there for another 20 years and make an extra $75,000. So the accumulated benefit obligation is just looking at the current situation and not considering how much they may make in the future. Then we have the VBO, the vested benefit obligation. This is the portion of the accumulated benefit obligation that they are entitled to keep. So this is only the vested amount. The accumulated benefit obligation included non-vested and vested, but the vested benefit obligations only including the part that the employee is already entitled to keep based on how long they've been there. So that's going to be the smallest obligation calculation. Then we get to the PBO. This is the one that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the chapter. So this is what you want to focus on. Projected benefit obligation. This is a liability, and this is where the actuary is going to consider the present value of the benefits they've earned to date using future projected salaries. So they're going to make an estimate as to what they will be making in the future. It includes non-vested and vested benefits. And this is what is used for GAAP. So that means that's what we're going to use in this class. The other ones, just kind of letting you know they exist. Projected benefit obligation is what we'll use here. This will typically be the largest obligation because they're expected to make more money as they go on in the future with the company. All right, so let's start out with our first example of our new case study, and it is, can I get a drum roll? Forever Fit Gear. So Forever Fit Gear designs and sells premium athletic apparel and accessories focused on long-term wellness and performance. Founded in 1995, the company has built a reputation, listen to this, for supporting its employees just as it supports its customers. So we want to work for a company that supports us as much as our customers, right? For years, Forever Fit Gear maintained a defined benefit pension plan, promising their employees a set retirement benefit based on years of service and final salary. So that's what we're going to be using as our case study is Forever Fit Gear. So let's jump into our example. We're going to work all through this throughout the rest of this video, and then we'll continue on in future videos. So Maria was hired by Forever Fit Gear at the beginning of 2026. The company has a defined benefit pension plan that specifies annual retirement benefits equal to 1.5%. So that's what the company's agreeing to pay. The higher the percentage, the more the company's saying they'll pay once you retire. Times the years of service, times the final salary. Maria is expected to retire in 2056 after 30 years of service. Her retirement period expected payout window is 15 years. So, in other words, she's expected to live for another 15 years after she retires. At the end of 2035, so after 10 years, her salary is $120,000. The interest is 5%. The company's actuary projects that Maria's salary will be $480,000 at retirement. So let's jump into how to calculate how much the company should have set aside in their projected benefit obligation. So here's all the same details, but I've pulled it out of the word problem, and maybe you want to take a picture of it because you can follow along as we work through the rest of the slides. So we see that the formula is going to be 1.5% for this company, just like we saw in the initial example. Her service years are 30 years. Her final salary at retirement is $480,000. Her retirement period, how long they think they'll be paying it out, will be 15 years. We've got 5% interest, and we are evaluating this 10 years after she was hired. So it's now 2035. Time flew. And she's been there for 10 years. So we are going to calculate what her projected benefit obligation is based on her 10 years of service and her future projected salary. So let's just kind of look at how this timeline will look. Here's Maria. She looks so excited. She's been there for 10 years, but she's still fresh. She knows how to do everything at the company, and she's got a long career ahead of her. So we've got the date of hire, and then she's planning to stay there for a full 30 years. So then it'll be happy retirement party for Maria. Then 15 years later, she'll be passing away. So she has 15 years that the actuary is expecting her to live after retirement. So let's work through these numbers with Maria. So first of all, we are going to take our first step out of 3 steps that we do to figure out the projected benefit obligation for a company. The first one is to compute the annual retirement benefits, and we're going to use the pension formula for that. For this company, it's 1.5%. For Maria, she's been there for 10 years, and she is projected to make $480,000 when she leaves the company. That tells us that Maria will have $72,000 a year coming in after she retires. That's pretty sweet. But she was making $480,000, but once she retires, she'll still be getting paid by the company $72,000 a year, and that's expected to happen for 15 years. So then let's move to our step 2. So here we're going to figure out the present value of the retirement benefits as of the retirement date. So what I'm saying here is she's going to get paid out $72,000 for 15 years. Let's figure out the present value of that as of the date of retirement. So here we're going to be looking at a deferred annuity. So we are going to go to the present value of an annuity factor to figure out the present value at her retirement date. So for her, she's going to be living for 15 years, that would be the estimate, and we were told that we're using a 5% discount rate. So we'll take the $72,000 that she's expected to be paid for the 15 years times the factor that we would find on the PVA, the present value of an annuity table, which is 10.3797. That tells us at the date of retirement, they need to have $747,344 sitting in that projected benefit obligation account. So if it's sitting there and it's still earning that 5% interest, it will allow them to pay Maria her $72,000 a year for 15 years. So when it comes to step 3, we're going to look at the fact that we have 21 years before we actually have to pay that money out. So it is currently 2035. It's the beginning of 2035, and Maria's not retiring until the end of 2056. So we really have 21 years left for that money to grow into the 747,000 that we need ready to be able to pay her out for those 15 years. But since we have 21 years for it to grow, now we're going to calculate the present value to get to how much we need in 2035. So we're going to use the present value table of a one-time dollar amount because we only need that 747 one time. Then it will start paying out the payments of 15,000 each year. So we take the present value of 5% and we have 21 years for it to grow. So it gives us the factor of 0.35937. We multiply that times the number we got in step 2, where we found out we needed 747,000. So we multiply it times the factor, and it says you need to have $238,571 in your projected benefit obligation as of 2035. So that tells us what the projected benefit obligation should be as of now. So let's look at that with numbers. So as of today, when we're doing the accounting, it's 2035. Maria's already been there for several years. Our projected, oh my goodness, I am struggling more than ever. Now let's look at this with numbers. So as of today, which is 2035 in this problem, Maria's already worked there for several years, and we have found that our projected benefit obligation needs to be the 268,000. And that's because we still have 21 years left for it to grow. She's already worked there for several of her 30 years, but we still have another 21 years for it to grow into the 747,000 that we need ready to be able to pay her out the 72,000 a year for 15 years. And at that point, Maria will have worked all of her years, and now she's sitting there happily in her 15 years of retirement, sipping her coffee and watching her soap operas. And she's getting paid $72,000 a year to do that because of this pension obligation. All right, so let's look at these same things, but we're going to really dig into it in this way. So I'm just walking through these same 3 steps, nothing new here, the same 3 steps, but let's look at it with, more of a analytical timeline. So our first step, you're going to see right there at the top right, it says the actuary estimates that the employee has earned. She's going to have $480,000. We're going to base that on her 10 years of service, and they say we expect to pay her out $72,000 per year for those 15 years. So then we go to step 2 and say, okay, so whenever she retires in 2056, that means we need to have $747,000 set aside. That's based on the 5% they'll earn over those 15 years where they're making payments of $72,000 each year. So we use the PVA because it's a series of payments, so an annuity. But we still have another 21 years to get there. So we're going to rewind to 2035, which is the present time. And we're going to take those 21 years times the 5% that they plan to earn on the benefits. And they are going to take the 747 that they want it to grow into times that present value factor. And we're just using PV this time. And we say we need 268,571 as of 2035 that is set aside, ready to pay out to Maria when she turns, or when she's been there for her 30 years of service. So these are the 3 steps to get the projected benefit obligation. So I'm going to end here, and then we are going to jump into more about the service and pension expenses.